I can deal with it for an hour and I'll just shower. I need to shower anyways.
I'll just shower. That's how hot it is. He's like, I'm gonna melt to death. I'll just shower.
I am definitely going to be sweating by the time this episode is over.
You're listening to Dots, Lines, and Destinations, a travel podcast with hosts Stephen Seagraves, Fosma Moon, and Seth Miller.
Hello and welcome to episode 301 of Dots, Lines, and Destinations. I'm Stephen Seagraves, joined by Seth Miller and Fosma Moon. Gentlemen, how are you?
Hot.
I'm cool, fortunately. I have air conditioning.
I have air conditioning, just not in my office. And even if I did have air conditioning in my office, it would be too loud for Stephen to
Well, I think what you need to do is you need to get one of those, window units. Not a window unit, but like one of the ones that's like an internal. You just like vent to the outside.
A split duct system?
Yeah. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. A mini split.
Mini split. Okay.
Yeah.
I also live in New Hampshire where you're not really supposed to need air conditioning, but it was over 100 here
Global warming,
yesterday.
man. Global warming.
Yeah, you joke, but it's real. So
I'm not joking.
No, I actually played hooky today and went and sat on the beach instead of working because it was too disgusting outside otherwise.
Yeah, we've done that a few times here in Portland.
Yeah.
Is when it gets too hot, you just make a beeline for the beach.
Yeah.
Too hot in Portland is like 83.
Anything over 79. No, but we've actually had in the 90s the last couple days. We're getting up there. So, and it was 52 at the coast.
That's better.
Yeah. So, anyway, let's talk about long distance train travel as some follow up from our last show, which was a live show with video. And listeners, if you missed it, you can catch it on YouTube. It's there. If you want just the audio, we've uploaded that as its own podcast. So, but Seth, you actually got a tip on Twitter that there's actually a company that specializes in long distance train travel.
Yeah, it's interesting. From what I can tell, it's not all in English, so what I can tell is very little. But they've got a pretty cool Instagram account, and it's seems to be a travel agency focused on putting together long-distance train trips. So I know people who have done, like, the Trans-Siberian on their own instead of buying the tour and things like that, and there's, a lot of resources online to help with that. But if you want something sort of in the middle, or there's a different type of path you want to take, or you want someone to help you pick cities to stop in along the way and the right trains to take between them, it seems like a good option to sort of split the difference between being a part of a tour group and full DIY mode.
Yeah. It does seem like kind of a little overwhelming when you look at some of like the long distance train travel, even in China, that you've done, to do that on your own or to do that without any kind of help to book. Because there's not always, readily available websites and easy places that we're used to as Westerners to book train travel.
Yeah, and even the Chinese train travel stuff, there's a lot of, there's Man in Seat 61. Seat61.com is great for train stuff, but even there it's like, oh, these are the train seats in the two different types for the overnight trains between Shanghai and Beijing, and it took me going out and asking around and doing a lot of digging to find people local who actually knew which trains were running where and when. Mm-hmm. So to try to get the better seats, which did not work. But
there is a benefit to using some kind of travel agent for some of this stuff.
I just sort of think about like the amount of time and energy we've put into learning things about airplanes and air travel and airlines, and how most people shouldn't do that because it's a terrible use of one's time.
Speak for yourself.
Seriously.
I think most people shouldn't. I think we're stupid and crazy and whatever, and we can, but I think most people shouldn't. Otherwise, who would listen to our podcast? There's nothing to do. No. But seriously, I think that in a lot of ways, there's a lot of good reasons to try the sort of other types of things, if you will. And so getting help isn't a bad thing always.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm wondering, like when you talk about train travel and say, your trip in Vietnam, you took a train. That's a pretty standard trip, right? Like because it is one train that just travels the entire length from south to north and north to south of Vietnam, right? Was it fairly simple to book?
Trying to remember now how we did it. I think so, but I think that was one that still required like a third-party website because the direct booking wasn't really feasible.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, there was definitely some quirks to it, and I ended up just booking me and Jason together on a single ticket because we wanted to make sure that we actually, both got seats and everything.
Yeah.
So, also, it was a gorgeous views, but a shitty train.
I've actually had friends, you guys, I've gone back and watched now, I think I've talked about this on the show. I've gone back and watched some episodes of The Amazing Race, some old seasons of it. And there's actually one where they travel by train on the overnight train in Vietnam. And it doesn't look any different than your pictures. And this was filmed in 2001. So
I wouldn't be surprised to learn that these seats that they were the same. And we're 20 years old then also. Just fewer layers of duct tape holding them together.
Yeah. Moving on to some aviation news. The BA, British Airways, 747s are really dead.
Dunzo.
Which is just crazy.
Are you sad?
I never flew on BA, so I don't know whether I'm sad or excited.
You've never flown British Airways at all?
I've flown British Airways short haul.
You're not missing anything.
I mean, I had heard that the business class seats weren't that great. I had heard coach was pretty brutal. So
even first is okay. Business is the same thing as the 777s and the 78s. Obviously, if you're upstairs, there's a little bit of a bonus, but other than that, nothing really.
Yeah.
I can't even say that I'm surprised.
I mean, how many 747s do they have, or did they have?
They had 28 still active.
Okay.
I mean, at one point they had over 100, I think.
I think active they topped out in the high 50s, but they've owned more than 100. Maybe the different generations of planes. Right, their first, it goes back to BOAC, which was one of the precursors to British Airways, but they were flying 747-100s, sort of some of the first ones off the line. 48 years, I think. British Airways has been flying 747s, and now not anymore.
Well, I remember going to the graveyard, and there was a ton of 744s.
And, it's actually surprising to me that they never picked up the 748.
They took the 380 instead.
Yeah, and do you think they're going to keep the 380s? I mean, I guess they have to, right? They have a huge fleet of them as well.
No, they have 12, if I remember correctly.
Really?
10 or 12. It's a smaller fleet, yeah.
Okay.
Are they going to keep them? I wouldn't, but...
A total of 60 744s.
Okay. Over the years, yeah. I wouldn't keep the 380s, but I'm also skeptical of demand returning, and we'll talk about this a little later in terms of what the transatlantic market looks like, and that's, British Airways' biggest sort of focus for transatlantic or for long haul.
They've already stored one of their 380s.
Yeah, they've stored, parked, grounded all of them at various levels, but...
Well, 11 are considered parked and one is considered stored.
Yeah, so... We shall see.
Wow. I mean, do you guys think the 744... I mean, it's kind of an iconic plane. Lufthansa is going to have some 744s left. They have 748s. Who knows how long the 744s are for the world.
Yeah, I think there were 9 airlines that still technically had them in, published on schedules.
Can I try and name them?
Sure. I can't promise I'll remember them all.
Saudia. That's all I can think of.
Really?
I'm trying to think. Not Air France. I'm trying to think of big carriers that have them.
Thai?
Saudia. Yeah, Thai is a good one. Does Malaysia still have some?
I don't believe so.
No. Lufthansa, of course, like we said. I don't think anyone in South America has any. Yeah, I can't think of who else would. I thought those were gone.
Retired theirs.
Or did they?
They're done. They did their last tourist flight today.
Oh, that's right. They just
Asiana, maybe?
China Airlines, Air India, Air China has both the 400 and the 8. Roisia in Russia. Korean has both the 4 and the 8. Lufthansa has the 4 and the 8. Asiana, Thai, and Mahan Air.
Mahan.
Not Air.
Saudi doesn't even have any left.
Yeah, and Royal Air Morocco used to have one that they used for some local and Hajj flights that apparently they no longer have anymore.
Wow.
So,
I mean, you guys, it's the Queen of the Skies. You guys going to miss it as it slowly fades away, and even the 748s probably won't stick around for long as passenger planes.
Yeah, we talked about this a couple weeks ago when Boeing non-announced that they weren't going to they weren't going to keep building them after the next couple of years either, and it's just the remaining cargo contracts that are out there. It is a distinctive sight, which makes it nice to see. I also, and I've had mixed memories on my flights on 747s. I've only been on the 400. I never got earlier models that I can recall. So that's good news, bad news. But, I got to fly on the KLM Combi up in the nose, and that was cool. But, with the crazy galley down half the side instead of in the back. It was, some weird things like that. But, Foz notes that the business class isn't great. I actually had 8 flights on BA 747, never in economy. I had 5 in business class, 1 in first, and 2 in premium economy. So none of them were the best by any stretch. But I actually don't mind the BA business class seat, mostly because I was always taking it to or from New York or Boston, and all I needed to do was sleep. And so, climb upstairs, go, I think it was mostly upstairs, go into my window seat, close my eyes, wake up in London. Yes, it wasn't a spacious or comfortable seat, but it was a decent bed for me.
Yeah.
So,
Foz, how do you feel?
Disappointing. I'm disappointed. I at least got the 1 and the 2. I never got the 3, and I still need the 8. But I'm curious to what Lufty and Korean are going to do if they have to make a decision between the 380 and the 748.
I think they get rid of the 380.
Looking at Lufty, the 380s are a little older than the 748s.
And Lufthansa's already indicated it'll have a smaller fleet of 380s if they come back, focus them in Munich. One of the interesting challenges, there's sort of capacity questions that have to be answered, and the ratio of for total seating, the 380 generally holds a few more for both airlines, if I remember correctly, compared to the 748. The 74s are a higher premium cabin configuration, especially on Lufty. There's a huge business class cabin that they sometimes switch out some of the rows for premium economy, but there's a very heavy premium bias, which, if we're looking at longer-term leisure travel, not business travel, hard to justify that. Counterpoint is, if it's fewer total seats, if you can't fill the 380 anyways, then neither of them is a smart thing to keep flying.
Yeah. Oh, boy. And in other aviation kind of sad news, Icelandair was on track to
this
fire.
This is aviation bizarro news.
They were going to fire all their flight attendants and use the pilots for the safety briefings. That was the plan.
They announced it.
Yeah.
There was a release that went out saying, we have terminated our contract with our flight attendant union. They aren't willing to negotiate with us. We'll find a different union that will. And in the interim, for the couple flights today we still have, we will get pilots to do the safety briefing. Which, I admit to being biased and only really understanding, to an extent, U.S. labor law, but firing the union rarely seems like a smart decision.
Yeah.
If you're going to go down, you might as well go down in flames.
Let's not use that analogy with airlines.
So what caused them to back down? Was it backlash from the public?
They negotiated with. It turned out that was a negotiating tactic.
No, okay.
The flight attendants eventually agreed to whatever terms they needed to, and they came to an understanding.
So it was a genius move in hindsight.
Yeah, which like I said, I understand the U.S. side of things. Other than Reagan firing all the air traffic controllers, I can't think of an example where something like that would happen.
Northwest and the ground crew.
Okay.
Northwest basically fired all their ground crew when they went on strike and replaced them with non-union people.
Wow.
I actually wasn't aware of that. When was that?
In the last 20 years? I mean, not that long ago.
Yeah.
Did it stick, or did they end up...
No, it stuck.
Huh.
As far as I remember.
Wow. Yeah, that is big news. I was going to say that, that one of the things I think about when it comes to Iceland is they seem like a pretty laid back society. I was actually surprised to read about all this and not, see like, oh, it's not a big deal. We'll get through this. Like, I didn't see that in any of the articles. People were just pissed, like in general. So, just fascinating.
2005.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah. And they made those hires permanent.
See, occasionally I got something buried back there.
Foz comes out of nowhere, left field. Random fact. So Sabre is considering being used for track and trace on everything?
I don't think so.
I mean, maybe. We kind of talked about this offline, and we were saying this kind of feels like headline fodder. But at some level, there is some truth to it, right? Like, they're using Sabre to track people.
Well, but we already
have the data.
But we already know that the GDSs are a target, right? Because you shared an article, I forget from where, like 2 years ago, maybe a year ago, on how PNRs are not unique and how they're being mined on a regular basis.
True.
Right? So this is nothing new in the grander scale. Yeah. I personally think this is just Sabre trying to boost their stock because they're lagging behind the others.
I don't want to say it's nothing new. I mean, maybe it's not new, but one of the things that came out in this story is the note that they were willing to respond to requests from the federal government to basically put a flag out for a name, and anytime new bookings came up, report on that to the government to help track people. So that's a little sketchy.
So I do have to pose the question. How do you do a string search in the 70s platform?
I have no idea how they're doing it, but it seems to be something that the government seems to think that they can do and that they've delivered on. So
they can't find your luggage, but they can find your name.
Well,
wow. To be fair, you don't do baggage tracking in Sabre.
PSS.
Yeah. But what is was it not World Tracer? That's a separate app though, right? Separate platform.
But Sabre has a PSS offering.
Yeah. Which manages it. Anyways, so part of this is yes, like your bag or your people can be tracked this way. What was the story where I thought it went off the rails? It sort of like went out and was like, yeah, the government has used this to track individuals from time to time, and so now we know that they could use it to track people for COVID tracing if they had to, and it's just a matter of time before that happens. And it was like one of those like, wait a second, how do we jump from here to there so quickly in my mind? Mm-hmm. Which is not to say that they can't or won't, but it doesn't seem as likely to me something the government is, quite frankly, keen to do.
Well, and it doesn't seem like the most efficient way. Like, why are you tracking if you're going to track bookings? Like, does that mean you're just so terrible at tracking entrance to the country, or what? Like,
I think part of it is also for domestic tracking.
Yeah. But,
right,
but even
so that's
then,
not
wouldn't
CBP
we
anymore?
But even then, wouldn't we be better served by, say, Apple's solution, which Apple and Google's solution, which honors privacy and uses a device that you carry around on a day-to-day basis?
Or the fact that all passenger manifest information is already shipped to DHS?
No, or that, yeah.
So you can't guarantee the person got on the plane, but they've got the booking, and there's a lot of different ways to skin this cat that don't involve establishing an entire new track and trace platform. But I don't know. This
is probably like so many other stocks in the last 3 months have jumped on speculation that they can help combat COVID. Like as an example, what is it, Express Spa, the little spa that sits in the airport?
Yeah.
They were on the verge of insolvency, and they announced they were going to do at airport COVID testing, and their stock soared.
Yeah, I got a lot of traffic from that story. The penny stock chat boards picked it up, and I got a lot of traffic.
Yeah, and so, I think this is partially Sabre just jumping on that bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know that Sabre wants to be in the data market for the government. Like, do they really want to be known as the company that doesn't honor privacy at all, or bows to government pressure all the time? I don't know that that's what they want to do.
To be fair, which company doesn't?
I mean, Apple's pretty good about refusing to do that.
Really? You know that your iCloud backups aren't encrypted so that they can decrypt them and hand them over to the government?
I don't have an iCloud backup.
Well, you're the exception. But
I back up locally, thank you very much.
As do I, but this is Apple is more about marketing privacy and security. They're not really about actually protecting your privacy and security. The fact that you can't turn Bluetooth off from a discoverable mode, that's a huge flaw. But that's how they track you, right? This is how they're monetizing all your movements throughout the day through OTG and things like that.
Well, they're not monetizing it.
But they're enabling the monetization of it. And they are monetizing it because it's coming back through app market revenue share.
True. Yeah, I mean, I get your point. I don't know that, I would put Apple on the worst offenders list of privacy.
I didn't say they were the worst, but they're not they like to play the part of they care about your privacy, but they really don't.
Yeah. Would you say like Android, just like the Android?
So a company whose entire business model is selling you?
Yeah. So anyway, I don't know. I'm kind of the story kind of took me aback just because of the COVID piece, like you said, Seth. I
don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah,
I guess is where I come down.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem like it's reasonable to use Sabre, especially since Sabre doesn't track all bookings, right? So it's not like a central repository for all bookings around the world.
No, but it does all bookings for particular airlines, right? So anyone who uses them as a PSS.
Yeah.
Right, and Alaska, American come to mind off the top of my head.
Yeah. Wait, Alaska uses Sabre?
Yeah.
Why is their implementation so bad?
What do you mean?
Just the way that their pricing model and everything, it feels like it's just shit.
Sabre is the oldest of the three GDSs. I'd bet you that some of the original stuff from the 60s is still running in that basement in Tulsa.
Oh, man. Seth, you had a note in here about pilot furlough potentials. What's the story there?
Likely to happen. Although JetBlue, we're coming up on WARN notice timing, right? So this is the airlines have to give notice that they might lay people off. And it's all going to happen on October 1st when the CARES funding runs out, blah, blah, blah. So JetBlue was the first to announce a deal with its pilots 2 weeks ago now that they wouldn't have a furlough. And it's presumed that involves lower minimum guarantees, but no one gets furloughed. So more details to come on that. Delta...
When you say minimum, no minimum guarantees, you're talking flying hours?
Yeah, pilots generally in their contract are guaranteed to pay for a certain number of hours whether they fly it or not, and it's based on what the airline thinks it's going to need over time. And so that number is going to be reduced for 6 months in exchange for no furloughs, and we'll see where the market is in February. The Delta or American announced its deal with JetBlue last week, and also came up to the idea of, hey, look, the American pilots were kind of pissed. They were like, hey, look, JetBlue negotiated no furloughs, and you haven't promised us anything like that, and now you're going to outsource all of our short-haul flying in New York and Boston to them. Cool. That's awesome. JetBlue Express. American Eagle, operated by JetBlue.
Hang on. Because we recorded our live show basically the day before the JetBlue news was announced.
Did we not talk about that at all?
We did not talk about it.
Oops,
So-
my bad.
Let's rewind there.
American Airlines. I can't believe we didn't talk about that. American Airlines and JetBlue announced a deal where JetBlue will essentially provide domestic feed and code share out of New York and Boston for American's international long-haul service.
Out of Philly and DFW?
No.
Or
Nope.
out of where?
So, yeah,
New York and Boston.
but so they've pretty much eradicated the bulk of their JFK operation. Are they going to ramp that back up now?
Who?
AA.
They announced 2 new routes, Athens and Tel Aviv. And they're resuming Rio.
As a seasonal, as opposed to year-round, which it used to be.
But it's going daily.
But I thought they've exited Madrid, and it was daily before, too.
Yeah.
They used to have twice a day to Sao Paulo, which I think is just once a day. Madrid, Barcelona, Milan. I thought it all went away.
Pre-February or since?
They were slated to go away.
Yeah, it's too hard to keep track in my mind of what's actually going to come back at this point. But just everything keeps shifting and keep changing too much to bet a ton on that. But they did announce those couple routes. Also, that how much of it is going to be American? Is going to be JetBlue feeding American versus its other partners? That no one's talking about details in the contract about things like, is it a... I've heard discussion that it's not just a standard code share and interline agreement, but there might be some preferred prorated accounting for some of those interline passengers. So, JetBlue will receive certain bonuses for putting passengers through, so to speak.
But even if we look at One World as a whole, out of JFK, what do we have? Heathrow, Helsinki, Santiago, Hong Kong.
It's not to all of One World, it's just to American, and they're not part of the transatlantic JV. There's a whole lot of weird shit involved in this deal.
But that's what I don't understand. Why? How does this even make sense, right? The main destination they serve out of JFK internationally is Heathrow, which BA flies, and AA flies out of Boston.
Right. No, it's at JFK and LaGuardia and at Boston. JetBlue is going to feed those flights. The interesting challenge is going to be that JetBlue is still planning on launching its own London service, so it's not going to want to feed the main routes that are internationally available. Now, the whole thing is bizarre. I just don't get it.
And this is their second attempt to try to do something like this.
And all this is kind of on the heels of kind of abandoning LAX as a hub, as an international hub. Yeah, reducing. And letting Alaska Airlines backfill capacity and feed there, and to an extent. And Alaska Airlines announced that it's going to expand as Also, did we talk about JetBlue moving its Long Beach service to LAX? We kind of touched on it, but I don't think we covered it in depth.
There's not a lot of depth to it. I don't know. There's just the whole deal with American right now, sort of trying to sort of retrench itself, but using partners for feed, understandably upsets pilots who need those flights for their own livelihood. And so the fact that this JetBlue deal came out the same, and at the same time, I think it came out the same day that the warn notices went out for Americans pilots, saying that a couple thousand of you might get laid off. Awkward. Very awkward.
Yeah. So what about you were kind of touching on some of the I interrupted.
And thank you, because I thought we had talked about that. But we're going through a list of airlines, and so Delta is in discussions, and there's sort of some interesting back and forth where Delta's basically pushing the pilots towards agreeing to broader cuts than they sort of wanted, and across the board similar reductions rather than special incentive lines where certain pilots would be allowed to take. It's basically that Delta wants to cut everybody 15% and letting some take a 30% cut. Mm-hmm. The short version. But then today, Alaska Airlines announced that it will It's managed to get enough voluntary departures that it doesn't think it's going to need layoffs for its pilots. So that's vaguely good news. I mean, there's still a lot of people who aren't working, but
it's good that there's no mandatory involuntary layoffs. Yeah.
So that's the latest on that. United also intends to have some layoffs, and I forget the numbers, but there's a lot.
Yeah. Oh boy, not good times. Not kind of news we like to report on. Really.
Sign of the times.
Yep. There's a post on headforpoints.com. The London City Airport CEO. He kind of talks about new lounges coming to London City. Who would have thought
an airport so heavily focused on business travelers would get by without having the main, or not the main, but one of the primary business traveler amenities?
Where are they going to put the lounge?
Out on the runway.
I would take it.
Maybe the water.
I think they were extending the terminal building.
Okay.
A little bit.
I've flown through City a few times. There's no extra space.
Well, I mean, you constantly feel like you're sitting in a closet everywhere you go, standing in a closet, waiting in a closet.
I always loved that there was a priority pass kiosk, like in the middle of the terminal by a sunglasses shop or something. Like, hey, sign up for a priority pass here and get access to lounges around the world. Except here.
There's a Toomey store too. A little Toomey kiosk.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's where they're going to put it. They're going to get rid of the Toomey store and put a lounge.
Oh, great. Lounge capacity 4.
Well, 2 if you want to have a little buffet in the corner, but...
It has always struck me as one of the best airports ever.
It's a great airport as long as you don't have to wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so many other small airports, right? They're great if you can time it where you arrive, you go to your plane, and off you go.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's always a little bit of uncertainty in the security lanes, but other than that, yes, I found it pleasant and easy and fun. I like to walk across the street from the last time I flew out of there, if I remember correctly, I actually stayed in like the Moxie Hotel, which is sort of across the water, and walked around.
Oh, so you walked over the bridge?
Yeah, I walked over the bridge and did some plane spotting, and it was pretty cool.
That's where they're going to put the lounge, across over by the hotel.
Moxie?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, sir, your flight will be boarding soon. You should probably head across now.
Well, the other interesting thing about there is the sort of private terminal. There used to be the lounge option. Like, if you wanted something resembling a lounge, there was a couple $100, but you could have a private terminal, sort of like the LAX suites or anything like that, or that sort of situation.
Yeah. Wow, fascinating.
Yeah, because when BA was running a flight out of there, right, there was no lounge. They just took one of the gate areas and they had comfy chairs and food for everybody.
Yeah. It's actually, if you actually look at Google Maps right now on the satellite view, you can see the new taxiway progress.
Nice.
Which is kind of cool. What else do we got? We have United and Delta earnings. I'm scared to ask.
Billions and billions.
How bad was United's? Just 2 point something?
1.6 billion net loss, 2.6 billion adjusted net loss. And I'm not entirely sure what the difference is, but one of them's bigger than the other.
And $1 billion of that was tagged to lack of Portland flights.
I highly doubt that. Wow. That's pretty. I mean, did they have any outlook on what the future holds?
Bad things.
I was going to say just bad. Answer hazy, try again.
There's some interesting stats mentioned, and let me scroll back up and see if I can pull some of them out pretty quickly. Load factors. They were pulling, I want to say, 35-ish. Here we go. Seat factor, which includes non-rev, was 38% in May and 57.8% in June. They doubled the number of flights from June to July and expect to expand again in August, which is sort of hard to believe given that passenger numbers are actually decreasing now, but with an expectation of load factor around 45% for the month of July. And only 15% of flights have 70% of seats or more filled. But of course, those are the ones that go viral on, maybe a bad term to use, go viral on Twitter and Instagram and such. Because people take pictures of their packed planes.
I mean, I've kind of posted on Twitter that most of the flights out of PDX on United are going out fairly full. And I'm guessing it's because there's so few flights a day that you just got to take one of the options via Chicago, San Francisco, or Denver. That's it. I mean, that's it. That's all you got. So, wow, that's wild. What about Delta?
Also bad. I'm sorry, I'm pulling up the document again now. I shouldn't have the tab open, but it's okay. Scrolling. Adjusted pre-tax loss of $3.9 billion.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And have they said, do they have any kind of outlook, or is it more of a we're just going to have to deal with this for the near term? I mean, they seem kind of optimistic from what I was reading.
Wait a minute, 3.9 versus 2.6. What did they write off?
Fleet related would be my guess.
That's a lot of fleet write-offs on antique planes.
Delta wrote off they announced retirement of all the MD-88s, all the MD-90s, the 777 and 737-700s, as well as like 10 and I think 7 763ERs and 10 A320s or vice versa. I'm sure there's some other stuff in there too, but yeah.
18 777s. Anderson said they're worth $10 million apiece. That's what, $180 million.
You're good at math.
And I can't imagine that the MDs and the 63s.
I don't know where else the money's going. All of this and like who's burning how much cash and everything. That the numbers are crazy. I don't know. I part of me is like, I kind of just want to like wait until they come out the other end and not think about it too much because it always worries me. But
wow,
there's a lot.
Yeah, no kidding.
So,
does Delta? I mean, just based on Anderson, just some of the things I've heard said. Do you think that they're going to come out of this the same, or are they going to have to really undergo some cuts, such as maybe reducing hubs, abandoning Seattle?
So actually, I just realized where their loss came from. It was from the international investments.
Oh, they did take that right down. Yeah. There's $2 billion there, or so, right?
Yeah, because they invested very heavily in Aeromexico, Virgin, and LATAM, and they had to take losses on all of them.
Yeah, we did talk about that. So,
I personally think Delta is the most at risk of not coming out in a good situation out of all of this.
Worse than American?
I think it'll be worse than American.
And what's your reasoning? Just because there's so much money outstanding, or what?
Well, the fundamental reason is hubris is a bad thing, and they've had a lot of hubris over the last decade. And
we're never going to lose money again.
I understand that, but Delta has had even more hubris than American, with the claiming to be the leader in everything. But more importantly, like they made really bad investments in these international carriers. They abandoned their, to some extent, their alliance, and they've been charging a premium, so people now view them as an expensive airline. And when money gets tight, people tend to be. It's the same thing as Southwest, right? People always, when they want a cheap flight, they always go to Southwest, thinking it's going to be cheap, and they don't think twice.
And so you think Delta's said, "Hey, we're the premium carrier, the upscale."
And their fares showed it. They were never nearly as aggressive with corporate agreements, so they had less security from that. So while there's no corporate travel right now, there's still some commitment guarantees and commitments that have happened. Whether or not they, we'll see how they get negotiated. But that's really the bread and butter of rebuilding your business, right? Charging a premium for your product particularly in the pointy end of the cabin, not having corporate agreements sustaining that in the long run. It works against you.
Yeah. Some good thoughts. Seth, any rebuttal?
I think they're all screwed. I don't know. I'm really intrigued, and we talked about this a lot last week, too, about Americans' push to just grow its way out of this sort of mess. And I understand the concept. I think that there's some good opportunities to do that in segments of the market, but I'm not convinced that there's a first mover advantage, so to speak, in terms of capturing market share. If that market share is the dregs of yield and not really the money that you need to justify the operations. But if you really can be profitable at 9% load factors, well, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay.
Lots more earnings this week and next. Tis the season.
Yeah, I'm sure next week will be just a bundle of sunshine. United, Lufthansa Group, American, and IAG are trying to get a transatlantic bubble established. What is this?
So my first question is, why wasn't SkyTeam involved?
Presumably they were asked and declined, but that's a very good question.
First, you got to explain what this is. What's the bubble?
Chief executives Willie Walsh, Doug Parker, Carsten Spohr, and Scott Kirby sent a letter to Mike Pence and I don't know how to say her name. Is that an L? YLVA? Ylva Johansson, who is the European Commissioner for Home Affairs and obviously the Vice President, because he's leading the COVID response team, asking that request the safe and swift restoration of air travel between the United States and Europe. We urge you to consider adopting a joint U.S.-EU COVID-19 testing program to enhance safety and build confidence in critical transatlantic passenger air services. The gist of it is they want the governments to agree that passengers can be tested before departure, and if they are a negative result, they can board flights, and that would allow a resumption of legit passenger service that doesn't require 14-day quarantines and would get rid of the current Schengen zone saying, "Nuh-uh, you can't come here," bit to Americans. And right now, the U.S. still has the limit on Europeans only being allowed to arrive through designated airports, and flights from Europe only being allowed to arrive at designated airports, and only for U.S. citizens, if I'm remembering it correctly. So, or permanent residents, I guess. But yeah, the bizarre part to me is that Europe seems to actually have mostly contained its virus challenges, and the U.S. is nowhere fucking close. And so the idea that, oh, well, you can get tested, and if you're negative, it's cool.
Yeah.
Like, given that turnaround time on tests right now is, like 2 weeks, but 3 or 4 days, you have no guarantee of what happens in the intervening time. Do I get tested, then go out on partying all weekend at the bars and then hop on a plane? But my test was negative. There's a lot of weird challenges because the testing process isn't very good. Maybe this is an opportunity to use those express spa clinics, but I don't think they were going to have the turnaround time takes testing is just too long because we don't have the infrastructure in place. I understand where they're coming from in wanting to establish a way to say, okay, you people are clean, you can go, but what a logistical cluster. I already had used F once, so we only get one per PG-13 rating, sorry.
Well, and I've seen, Europeans are traveling pretty readily around Europe.
Yeah.
Now, borders are pretty much open and, things like that. So for Europeans to come over, yeah, that's great, but they right now can't, based on what you assume as well as I do, Seth, that the borders are technically still closed for them. So how far is this looking out? Are we looking out 6 months? Or is this bubble for the next year? What is the out, what's the length of this agreement or plan?
TBD. They offer no specifics.
Interesting. Okay.
Or certainly not in the version of the letter that's public. The whole thing is stupid in my mind because, and this again goes back to, and I've bitched on Twitter about U.S. Travel, which is the trade organization, trying to, they're now lobbying for funding from Congress, which I get it. The businesses are all struggling. They need the money. But also, as part of that, maybe put a opportunity to push the government towards a more coherent plan and response with contact tracing and testing and the things that actually need to happen, not just we need money to keep things funded. Fixing fixing the problem will solve. Containing the problem will solve a lot of these problems, but we've done a terrible job of that.
There has to be there's some things going on, right? There's United in the last few weeks has restarted flights to Paris and Amsterdam from Newark, and there's passengers on it. You pull up the seat map for Amsterdam tonight and Paris tomorrow. A bunch of seats are taken. And so there has to be some restrictions that were lifted, because where else would these people be going?
Onward connections? Probably not.
I don't
those airports.
Yeah, I don't.
US doesn't have, or United doesn't really have much there. I don't know.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be cargo, because all the cargo flights are running with 4-digit flight numbers. Because things like Milan and Rome right now are cargo.
That's a good question, Fuzz. I mean, I don't really know where. There's nothing been published that says, "Oh, these restrictions have been lifted."
And they haven't been. They haven't been.
Yeah.
Maybe more people are saying, "Oh yeah, I'll go quarantine when I get there." I honestly don't know, but.
Hey, do you know how well Europe is enforcing the quarantine rules? Or are they?
I think it varies country by country. Some are doing a better job than others.
Gotcha. Wow. Oh, boy. I think we have a couple more topics, or is that it? I think that might be it.
That's it.
Yeah. Just wanted to say a quick thank you to our new patrons, Alex, Brian, Kyle, Sam. Thanks for joining, supporting the show. Thanks to all our Patreon supporters. And thanks to all the listeners, really. If you want to support the show, you can join us on Patreon. It's a small monthly donation. Or you can follow us on Twitter at DotsLines, moredotsmorelines.com. Until next time, happy travels.
Take care.
See you later.